If the three players who missed the penalties were white, none of this would have happened.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Gorm TV. My name is Mamobo, Ogoro, and we're a web show that dissects the social issues that affect Ireland's multicultural generation. So we're a couple of days out of the Euro Cup 2020, in which Italy and England ran the final, and Italy won from a score of 3-2. So after, there was also celebrations, a lot of heartache amongst the fans, where Italy fans were celebrating. We have Shane in Italy right now that was celebrating with them. And England fans were a bit disappointed with the loss. With that came a lot of backlash and a lot of outrage as to the reactions to several players that played for the England team. So there was a lot of remarks, a lot of racist remarks, a lot of anti-immigrant remarks by a lot of people online, particularly Twitter, regarding some of the players from migrant backgrounds. So I kind of wanted to have a discussion on that, and if this sort of language, if this sort of conditional belonging, let's say, exists in Ireland as well. So we have a couple of new faces here, and we have a couple of people who are really engaged with this sort of conversation and would like to add their voice to this conversation. So just as a reflection of what happened in the Euros 2020, I just want to ask you guys' opinion. Like, what are your thoughts on what happened on the outcome of Euro 2020? Shane, I'd like to start with you, and if anyone wants to touch base, just let me know.
Yeah, I thought overall it was a great tournament and really, really exciting. I think the reaction in Italy it's been great to be here. I have to say, so thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it went down really, really well. All I could see is positive kind of reactions here. I know there was a little bit of trouble here in Italy for the semi-final. I haven't spoken to some of the military around the city. There were some cars and some damage done to the area around Rome on the night of the semi-final. But after England won, there was not much a reaction other than cars beeping their horns until 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, and that was pretty much it. But yeah, obviously in regards to the negative reaction that happened with on the side of the English, that was really disheartening and pretty awful to see. It's been good to see the reaction. Large other parts of the community, particularly around Manchester, and I think Withington, is where Marcus Rashford is from. One of the players who was racially abused. So it was good to see that reaction and what they've done with the mural and the mural of Marcus around that area where he's from. So all that's been great. I think kind of stepping away from that and kind of addressing your just question on general racism within in sport in Ireland. Unfortunately, there's been a very recent event here too, not in a football context, but a basketball context, and it actually kind of was football related. The CEO, or former CEO now, we should say, of Basketball Ireland actually tweeted a comment in relation to a penalty that England won in the semi-final, trying to be, I suppose, quite funny or play on words. And I'm not sure if anyone else has seen it, but he commented on a Facebook post by the BBC. The penalty, Raheem Sterling was believed to, many people would say, would have dived for the penalty, and he commented Black Lives Matter. And naturally enough, that went down really, really badly. There was an investigation done by Basketball Ireland, and they've since parted ways mutually. Having spoken to some members within the basketball community within Ireland, and even just checking the comments online, there's been a really there's been I don't really know how to phrase it, but yeah, people weren't happy with how Basketball Ireland kind of reacted to it. They weren't really quick enough, I suppose, in responding, and that's kind of what we've been seeing. Having spoken to some members in basketball in the basketball community, in various clubs around the country, they were really upset, and they would say Basketball Ireland there's actually been a lot of work done in this field. But when it comes from the top down, pretty awful, and that could really set that sport back, unfortunately, in Ireland. The diverse inclusion officer has also stepped away, who is black. So it's had some really negative consequences. So that's all I have to say, I guess.
I'd like to pass it to you, Matt, as well. What were your thoughts on the Euros, the outcome of that? I know you have a podcast on football yourself. If you want to mention that as well, just to let our audience know as well.
Yeah, so myself and a friend of mine called Ed Keoghan, we do a weekly football podcast. It's basically mostly on the Premier League, so we kind of steered away from the Euros, and we're going to be starting back up in a couple of weeks' time because we're going to kind of let the dust settle after the Euros, and we didn't want to be recording something and then the next day something major happened, which happens a lot during the summer with transfers and managerial changes and stuff like that. But myself and Ed were talking there, should we do something about this? And we kind of just decided against it because we were not too educated about it, to be honest with you. But my own personal opinion on it was, throughout the whole day, I thought the running of the actual final itself, I thought the 8 o'clock kickoff time was just a bit of a bad move. In terms of English fans, the pubs were open from 12 o'clock. I mean, what else did they expect? They probably should have had the match 12 o'clock kickoff time, so to give themselves the least amount of trouble. I don't want to say it's the English fans, but it's a minority of the English fans that just ruin it for the rest of them, because 60,000 people or 65,000 people went into the stadium and they had a great time, and unfortunately England didn't go through for England. But like, there was probably 50 or 60,000 people outside the stadium who were involved in, just have a few things down, 2,300 police incidents were reported throughout the whole of the Euros, and the majority of them were in England and Wales. And this was the first football tournament that was actually spread across the whole of Europe, so it wasn't situated in one country. So that's bad news in itself for the likes of England and stuff like that. But there was so much, and my own personal opinion on the penalty misses as well, Marcus Rashford, Jadon Sancho and Bukayo Saka. My first thought when the three of them missed the penalties was, they're going to have an awful night online. And I just knew straight away, I said that they're going to be targeted straight away. And there was 5 arrests made over the last couple of days, and all of them are within 30 to 40, 50 years of age. A 48-year-old man with a very, very good job actually was arrested, and he was just said his one and only excuse was, I was hacked. So a lot of these people who come on and throw the racist abuse around are faces. They have cartoon characters, or they have players in front of them and stuff like that. And a recent incident that we covered on our podcast was the Brighton striker, Neil Maupay. He was racially abused as well, and the police tracked it all the way to a 16-year-old kid in Singapore. So I think English people get a lot of bad press when it comes to racism, because a lot of football players who play in England get racially abused. And it's a widespread issue all across, especially in countries like where Shane is now, in Italy and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it was unfortunate that, and another one of my thoughts as well, I might as well say it here before somebody else comes in, was that if the 3 players who missed the penalties were white, none of this would have happened. And that's a fact of the matter. Like, if Jack Grealish had taken the 5th penalty instead of Saka and missed the penalty, I'm not going to say nobody would have got abuse, but Jack Grealish would have been held up as still the golden boy, and Saka was held up as what he got abused for. So I think it's sad overall. But I think I do want to say, though, I don't want to end on a negative note. I think over the last 3 or 4 days, a lot of the press has been positive around the 3 boys. Shane touched on Marcus mural as well, and Saka came out and today and said that he's not going to let this sort of thing dishearten him and stuff like that, which is good for a 19-year-old kid to have that kind of positivity, and hopefully he has a lot of positive people around him who are looking after him. He's still only a kid, and He's 19 years of age.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my opinion on it. So I won't talk too much. I'm used to rambling on my podcast, so I'll let somebody else have a go now.
Thanks a million. And you forget that he's only 19. I thought he was just an adult, but obviously he's an adult, but 19 is still a child when you think about it. Like, Sandrine, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I was just kind of touching off with what Matthew said. Like you, like I don't remember even the last time I'd watched football. Like I literally only watched it because my little brothers were just like obsessed with the fact that England were going to lose. So I was like, okay, I'll just get on with the family group chat. And I remember I was watching on my laptop. I had my phone on and like I was FaceTiming them, and they love Marcus Rashford, but like they were like, oh, for today's tournament, we're going to support Italy. But like the moment the penalties happened and the 3 black players missed it, I just saw their face, and they're 14, and straight away they were like, they're going to receive racism. And like that's the harsh reality of being like a black fan, knowing that in football, like whoever you idolize or anything like that, like that's what they're going to receive. And like I just saw it and I was just like, this is just so sad that like my little 14-year-old brothers, like they know that straight away. And I remember like you don't have to be a fan of it. Like straight away, as Matthew said, if it was 3 white players who missed it, no, that wouldn't even been an afterthought, because would have been like, we lose as a team, we win as a team. And I think like straight away when I went on Twitter, like the abuse already started. And even myself, like when I posted, I had to like mute my comments because I was like, oh, if someone comes after me to like say X, Y, and Z. And I think it was kind of just a hardship then of the harsh reality of when you are like a Black British or a Black Irish, anything like that, when you have that dual identity, knowing that when you lose, like your blackness is always going to be visible. So like I say that in the sense where I tweeted about it being like, we live in a society where it's like, oh, do you know, like we shouldn't really look at color, and color shouldn't, I don't know, stipulate someone's ability to play football, X, Y, and Z. But like the moment they lost, like that was what was focused. It was because they were Black. It was because Rashford came from a single parent household, and X, Y, and Z, like all of the blackness was used. And I think like it's one of like, it's the sad part of reality, but like it was something that I just knew would happen. And like I even saw tweets like where it was this British mother and was literally like telling her kids to like please rush home because all the players that missed were Black. So, you know, like there was just that fear like already in it, being like, if you were Black in England, like just hide yourself. And like TikToks and everything like that, like they were making a joke of it, but it was kind of like that reality of it. And like straight away I was like, thank God I don't support football or anything like that, because like imagine how scary it would be if it was something like that in Dublin and like you're Black on a night out or anything like that, and you just know like they've lost Ireland, the team, like people just see blackness and it's like, you don't even have to be related to Rashford or anything like that. It's just like, oh, you're Black, you represent us losing and everything like that. And like Matthew said, yeah, I'd seen the ones with the people which got caught with the racist abuse, and yeah, it was literally like, oh, I got hacked. And like even with the workplaces, like trying to take accountability with regards to like, oh, our company doesn't support racism, yet like all of their staff was white. So there was like, well, you're not really showing diversity in here. So it really did spark up that. But the one time that I'll praise Twitter, it did hold people accountable. Like I saw things spreading like on Instagram and everything like that, being like, if you see a racist comment, like report it, but like also find the person on LinkedIn, like find their workplace and send it to them. So like I kind of feel like with what Matthew said, there was that like support there where people just knew what to do straight away. So like instead of seeing the comments and being like, yes, you're offended, but like find the person and hold them accountable. Because once they're caught, like it is like, oh, I got hacked, it was a joke, I was drunk, I was this. So like that was the great thing that we saw, that like it's becoming quicker, like where legislations and government and people in power like are not going to like change it, but people themselves are going to like literally like hound them down and be like, this you, and get that result done way quicker than other people, you know.
Yeah, and I can see that as well, just looking on Twitter and the internet, people were actually holding other people accountable. But when, like, I was thinking about when you said like, imagine that happened in Dublin. Would that actually happen in Dublin? Is that a question? I know, Connor, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, hi guys. Yeah, really interesting listening to the team talking, and I agree with what everyone was saying there. I was actually on my knees praying when Marcus Rashford went up to take the penalty, and my wife said, "Why? I thought you were up for Italy. Why are you blessing yourself?" I said, because if he misses, the abuse he's going to get. And that was the first penalty taker. So by the time the third one, I was like, oh, holy God, what's going to happen? I should turn my phone off, because I knew I'd be really, really, I don't know, just angry by the abuse that was going to come in. I said it to a friend of mine when the first penalty was missed. I was like, geez, that poor Mark is going to be in for it. And he's like, why? I said, oh, wait to see it. And for the next day, it blew up. So what I found really interesting, I spoke to a guy in Facebook, high up in Facebook, who and his job is to look at the abuse online. So he actually tracks all these keyboard warriors and these trolls. And I said, look, I'd love to get an insight. I'm actually going to share with the group some of the information he sent on to me, because I guess he's a specialist in a way. And he said that what happened is that not only do you have the people in England, okay, it's not the people in England, some people in England, certain fans, you're right to say, Matthew, it's a minority of people, but unfortunately that minority still has a stronghold in terms of the English psychic, right? So he says that when something happens to a black person, that there's actually like a dark hole in the internet, or a group of people where it's posted, and that's why you get these random people who are just racist, and they might even be into football, but here's an opportunity to hammer a black person.
And in terms of the vocal minority, yeah, like I'm not denying there's a minority in England there, but they're quite a substantial minority, and it's not just because they're vocal, it's because they are a very significant minority. There's as I was chatting to you last night, is it Mamobo?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was saying to you last night about how British imperialism has ingrained a certain culture amongst the English, and I will say this here, there's been an evolution of consciousness, and I think there's one thing for sure that's come out of this here. If anything good's come out of it, it is that evolution of consciousness has definitely evolved again, and it's become more widespread amongst a greater section of the English community. But we can't get away from the fact that this is deeply ingrained in a very substantial section of the English support. This isn't a new thing. Maybe the targeting of in terms of the players being black players, maybe that's a new thing. But the racism and the trouble causing has been going on for decades, and they just find new targets all of the time. It wasn't that long ago; it was the Irish. Now they're moving on to blacks. Even Wayne Rooney, he had kicked out one time back in the late, maybe early 2000s, late 90s, and they did refer to him that fiery streak in him. And for people like myself, I know what that meant. And that was the Celtic side, because his name's Rooney, and there's still that mentality amongst many English people that when they think of the Irish and people of Irish descent in England, despite them being there, born there and reared there and all the rest, they still look at them as having that Celtic gene in them, which was the wild gene, as far as they're concerned. If you see Game of Thrones and things, the wildlings, as far as the English are concerned, that's what us Scottish and Irish and Welsh, or people of the Celtic and descent, that's what we are. That's very much so. That's still very much a part of it of the English sport. And I don't want us to downplay how big a section of the English sport that really is. It's not just because they're vocal; it's because they're quite a big element.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a million, Fiacre, for that, and it really does show how sort of like when you mentioned the English imperialism that has been gone through not even decades, hundreds of years that has happened, and it's really shown how it transcends in different areas of social life and culture. But Paula, did you want to add something there as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I agree with Fikra what he was saying, because basically I've been very interested in this subject of racial abuse in soccer since I was small, because of course as a Latina, we love soccer. I really like soccer. I've always watched soccer. And now, for example, my boyfriend also loves soccer. So we always watch, we're always watching Sky News. But even back home when I went to matches and stuff, most of in Ecuador and in Brazil, everyone is very different looking, okay? You could be totally white or totally indigenous or black looking, and you're all Brazilian or you're all Ecuadorian. But there is anyways horrific racism. There's really bad racism. People are incredibly no political correctness at all back home. It's way worse than here in Ireland. But in matches, it's kind of the same thing that happened here with Rashford and Sancho. in soccer is our players are all black Ecuadorian or black Brazilian, most of them. And when they win, it's kind of like, oh yeah, our black men, our black little boys, super love. And when they lose, it's also horrific. And the word in South America to be racist is another level of horrific that is allowed. And there's no, for the Copa or anything, there's no checking or saying anything against it because it's Latin America and they don't care. But in here, because of my boyfriend, we watch so much Premier League and stuff. And we follow Manchester United, so of course, Rashford and Saka and Sancho now. And it's like, I was surprised that Sky News does so many ads against racist abuse, like since 3 years ago. But it's because there's so much, like, it's not just this time. Like, I feel many people just this time realize, because it's been such a worldwide thing that everyone watched, and also because after COVID, everyone was very excited about anything that's happening. But all along in matches, for example, Pogba, that is a French black man, like, he gets so much racial abuse every time he fails or he doesn't do what he's supposed to do in the match. Even though there's tons of white players in Manchester United that have horrible matches, super stupid plays, and no one says anything about the race or where they come from, you know? And I think that's the problem here. Even the huge issue is that, like, even though they're amazing and they're doing the best, and even all of these black players, like, outside the pitches are trying to do so much for their communities and stuff. It's even a way to prove themselves, right? This thing we have as migrants or like second generation migrants to be like, no, I'm really good. Like, I'm really trying here to be accepted. And like that, always they receive abuse, racial abuse. But then now, because they missed a thing that also is, as we say, Saka was 19 years old. Like, he just started his career. Same Sancho in Manchester. And like, they just put them to do the penalties. It is a bit like, of course they choose, but like, it's so, I think it makes people angry because it's like, it's so ridiculous them receiving so much racial abuse for this, because all the white players will never have gone through this. And in penalties, it's even like, you step up and you take the penalty. So it's like, like, maybe let's see the bravery. No, like, so as also Connor said, it's all about just racism, just people like finally being able to, like, allowing themselves to be racist with players. And yeah, I find that very interesting because like I did an essay and research on like men and racial abuse in soccer, comparing Brazilian soccer and racial abuse with what happened with Mesut Özil, that is a Turkish German player that he's very, very famous in the German team. And basically he was one of the first players ever that said, I'm an immigrant when I lose and I'm German when I win. And he like also always was a voice of racism when no one else was saying it in any country. And so, yeah, and I found it incredibly interesting because basically what I research and see is that soccer helps other men to like show their emotions in a way that the society doesn't allow them to. But in the same way, I think it has become such a mechanism of that letting go and let it go of any like walls, that when they have that racism that maybe they don't show usually, then they can just let it go on Twitter and everywhere. But I do agree with everyone that the huge issue here is that these social media and platforms don't do anything. And for example, I think everyone that is watching this, I recommend, and everyone here, Mika Richards, that was a soccer player, he did Tackling Racism, a documentary in Sky News about racism in soccer. And he did it in 2021, but it's super good. Like, it's really, really good to understand all of this easily. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and those points that you were saying, just in terms of how it just transcends even different cultures around the world as well, is just really, really impactful and really insightful. And I just think that it's really important here that we're having this conversation as well, but it's on the onus of the fans as well and the people on the social media, like you said, Paula, to really talk about these things. But bringing it back home, do you think, I'm not sure if everyone have different opinions or they have their own personal experiences, but do you think, like you were saying in terms of the football player that was it German and Turkish, I believe, do you think that happens for, let's say, players of migrant backgrounds in Ireland when it comes, I know we don't get I don't know, I'm not a huge football fan myself, but I know to the stages of like, let's say the Euro 2020 and things like that, we're not like in the final. We weren't in the final, but like, do you think that sort of happens in Ireland? I'm going to go to Sarah and then to Fiachra.
What I was going to say is that we need to be careful that it doesn't accelerate here. I think I remember going to my first GAA match, and I was watching and in the audience, and I was enjoying it and everything. And some fella in front of me got agitated with one of the football players, and to me they were all Irish, and all of a sudden start calling him Italian. And then I stopped and I realized his surname, and then I went, oh, and it kind of got me thinking, and I was like, wow, I'm experiencing right in front of me, your man's having a go at one of the football players, you know? And it really made me really uncomfortable. And it's about power dynamics, and it's about this feeling of, you know, wanting to insult someone. So let's look at the difference. What does this person have that's different, you know? And I'm just going to pick at that as being the flaw. But the issue as well that we need to be careful with, remember when the French team a few years ago did really well, and people started saying, you know, the African team that won it for France, and that started going viral because the football players were, you know, North African descent, French Arabs, and you know, and that started going viral, and the footballers got really agitated and said, hold on, you know, that's my heritage, and these are like my parents are immigrants, but I'm French born and I'm French, and I'll be, you know, this is a French team. It's not an African team in France, you know? And it was just interesting to see that, because people were feeling woke at the time and thinking, going, yeah, you see, the immigrants are doing well, you know, and look, if it wasn't for the French Arabs, you know, you wouldn't win at the football matches, and you wouldn't have the likes of Karim Benzema, or, you know, if that's the second name, if I got that correct, you know? So like, you know, or, you know, the Zidane of, you know, French footballers. So the thing is, like, they said, well, hold on a moment, I identify as being French and that's it. And yes, my parents would be originate from North Africa and so on. So like, we need to be careful in how we, you know, look at our players and look at people in sport and how we identify them and how they identify themselves. If they identify themselves as, you know, representing Ireland, then they are everything about Ireland. Their skin color, their ethnicity, everything, that is Ireland, you know, and it should be the same way for England. So like, you know, I think we just need to be careful, because it's there and it's happening. We just need to be careful that it doesn't accelerate. And we need to learn from England and the issues with England. I actually agree a lot with Fiachra in everything that he said with regards to a culture in England, and that, you know, that kind of, I guess, superiority culture, and like stems from, you know, them believing that they're a superpower and they're, you know, colonial kind of history, you know, so they do look at things and do view the world through a different lens that we would see it as you know, from across the way. So I think that's something to be cognizant about, but I also do think really we need to be careful that it doesn't accelerate things. With regards to social media platforms, that is so useful to know, Connor, because with regards to like women in sport, they're also getting, you know, a very hard time, whether that's boxing, whether that's soccer, whether that's, you know, GAA, you know, they're getting a really hard time. So I'd love to learn more about, you know, in terms of targeting, you know, the racist kind of targeting, but also kind of with regards to gender. And I'd be interested to see an intersectional approach in terms of women of color who are Irish representing as well, and what's happening there. That's
very
points.
Interesting. Thanks for your points, Sarah. Fiachra, you want to go, and then I'm going to move on to Sandrine.
Yeah, geez, there was so much there to add. I sort of only one thing I was going to ask, kind of what you were asking there. But I suppose for any of the guys that's here, that's maybe Connor and whoever else I missed it, is working in the sports sort of field these days. I was going to ask, are they seeing anything similar in Ireland? My view, sort of tying on with what you were saying before, Mamobo, was that in my experience in Ireland, that's not been the case, because we grew up sporting likes of Paul McGrath, Phil Babb, and there was it was just never raised at all, you know. And I suppose, well, Ireland did do well, that's the thing, you know. And in terms of Paul McGrath, for sure, he did have his drinking issues, you know, and to my memory anyway, there was never anything said about it. There was never, with respect to his colour of skin, you know, it was never, oh, she'd expect that off one end. There was never anything like that there, you know. So to my mind in Ireland, that just wasn't the way. But I would be interested to know, obviously immigration has increased an awful lot. For the people who's working in that sort of field now, do they hear anything now? I know I don't hear anything when I'm out and about. And in the GAA scene, I know there's a couple of Cork players, well, they were from Fiji, actually, you know. I think they had some remarks maybe said to them, but I'm not too sure how widespread it was. As far as I know, it wasn't. But I'm sure there was wee digs of comments said, because I know even fellas in the north, I'm from Armagh, get wee digs of comment and said, you know, we be referred to as the orange north or the black north because of the loyalism thing that's up here, you know. So there would be wee digs. We'd be accused of not being British up here by players. Some players when we play down teams from the 26 counties. But and then what was the other? I was trying to remember Sarah's points there too. She was making some good points there. I'll get back to that. I can't remember what you were saying. Oh yeah, sorry. With respect to the claims about you know, the viral thing that went around about the players, the French players being African, I think a lot of it was sent around with good intentions, because the only people that I seen sending it was people from a Muslim background. I think that the ones I seen was there you go, the Muslims won the World Cup for them. And I think, yeah, as much as I can see what the intention was in terms of trying to maybe remain people who's not Muslim and not from, you know, a descent of other countries in France or whatever, trying to remind them, you know, that's what we can bring to you. And funnily enough, I do find that myself. I think myself, when I see immigration there, I think this is great. I says, we'd see the football team we're going to have in a lot of years' time, you know. But there is obviously a danger too there, where there can be a flip side to that there, where they can end up getting blamed, going, you're not one of us anyway, you know. So absolutely, I agree. We'll have to be where it can be a bit of a minefield. Things can be done with good intentions, but we've got to be careful of trying to shove that in people's faces too much and making them feel like, oh, well, actually, what, this isn't yours at all. This is ours. You know, we're the Africans or we're the Muslims or whatever it is. You know, we've got to make sure it's not done in, but people don't other themselves too much. You know, absolutely embrace your heritage and remind people of what you bring to the table, but don't turn yourself into another at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a million, Fifa, for that. Sandrine, you wanted to add something, and then I'll move to May.
Yeah, it's just in regards to what you were asking about, like in regards to the changing nature of Irish sports. I was literally writing an essay about this today, right? And I was kind of looking at it in regards to, you see, Ireland is in a very particular stage, like let's say with GAA. So that's what I was looking at. And the way like that's linked to when like Irish like created their own identity, like one which was away from British colonialism. So I was looking at it in the sense of when you do have Black players, like, so I think it was a Westmeath player, I'm probably gonna butcher his name, but you just say, and like he was talking about like growing up in Westmeath and how like he plays for GAA and like he's in literally in all of the ads now, and like my little brothers played GAA like since they were 5, and like he was talking about it being like now like it's fine, like people have kind of embraced him, but that's just because he has that national status and because he's on Super Value ads. But he talked about like how like when he was playing, like when a younger stage, when he was literally like the only player there, like, or him and another person, and whenever they'd go on the pitch, like it wasn't like, okay, racial slurs, but it was still this sense of you don't belong in this pitch. And that's why I say like in Ireland it's so unique in that regards, because again, like with GAA was like, okay, well, unless your ancestors were like at the IRA or the Fenian Revolution, that you don't deserve to play the sport because it's ours. So I do think like it's coming into that, like, again, like I don't play sports, so this is just from my nerdy writing side of it, and it is that like where it's attached to identity and it's attached to like what makes you Irish. So like if there is a sport like hurling and like you see like a Black any other person play and you're like, oh well, like in the past was always white and now it's changing, and like as Fikra said, like we should look at that being like how proud it is and like how cool it is. Like whenever I go to my little brother's matches, I'm like, okay, they're like play for Carlos, so I don't know how good they are, but like it's still such a cool thing to just see how proud they are of playing it, and how like when you ask them like what does Irishness mean, they just go straight away to GAA. So like they link their identity to sports. So like I think that's where like Ireland is at that stage, like where whenever we are talking about like the influx of migration and the changing nature of it, it is changing every aspect, even in sports, where like you are seeing people which are typically not Irish playing like the traditional sports of it.
Yeah, and I think it's like you were saying in terms of connecting it to your identity and things like that. I think sport is a huge way that people like speak about their identity and who they are. But May, you wanted to add something there and quickly to Shane after?
Yeah, Sandrine absolutely just read my mind there. I was going to go down there as well. But I was going to say that I did gymnastics, acrobatic gymnastics, for about 10 and a half years. And most of the people who did gymnastics, I'd say probably about 50%, were either like they're people of color or from migrant backgrounds. And like nobody said a word. It was a normal thing. You went to competitions and lots of people, like they weren't ethnically Irish, I guess you could say. And I think, like Sandrine said, like it's because I guess gymnastics isn't tied culturally to like Irishness and what it means to be Irish. There's like a sense of ownership over gymnastics as there is with like football or hurling. So I think that it's kind of like this kind of gatekeeping kind of sentiment around it, trying to like, it comes from, obviously stems from xenophobia and trying to like protect our culture from foreign influences when it doesn't need any protection, because it seems like, I think it's thriving, it seems alive and only going from strength to strength really in Ireland. And what better way to strengthen it more than just to share with other people?
Exactly, yeah, that's a great sentiment. And Shane, do you wanted to add something there?
Yeah, just on the O'Halpine brothers, in relation to what Fiacre was saying, yeah, there's 3 O'Halpine brothers, and I know Sean Og, who was probably the best out of the 3, he used to comment on the racist abuse that he got, and when he moved from Fiji when he was very young, you know, his father warned him that like people won't like the color of your skin or the way you look and stuff like that. And you know, he didn't really get much abuse in Cork County, but he said he got abuse when he went to Cork City sometimes, and in matches. You know, there was one incident where he said someone said to him, "Go home and wash yourself," and he used to get various other bits of abuse like that. Thankfully not from his team. Like he did say in relation to his team, a lot of his team actually stood up for him, and if they ever heard anything that was said about him, you know, they'd be watching out for themselves, the person that said it, you know. So yeah, I definitely think that I would be quite worried. I think Sarah and possibly yourself were touching on the point, Mamobo, regarding, you know, I'd be quite worried that people see the reaction of what has happened in England and potentially being encouraged to do the same, or not necessarily even encouraged, but just, you know, particularly younger people perhaps who see it and say and maybe don't have the understanding, or maybe think that that's acceptable or whatever else, and copying, just because that's what kids do. They often copy people. So I'd be really worried about that. But yeah, hopefully there's a good conversation amongst younger kids and people that are older than them, and kind of educating them. Particularly when I say that, I particularly mean white kids here in Ireland are told that, you know, that's wrong, that's completely non-tolerable. So just to address that point.
Thanks a million, Shane, for that. And I think it's definitely one to have those conversations with younger people that are engaging in sport, football, hurling, all the sports that we do here in Ireland. But I kind of wanted to ask a question, and I'll move on to Sarah and Matt to finish off. And you can take your points as well. But my question was, what can, like, there's a silent majority when it comes to fans and football fans in particular. But what can fans actually do to kind of like decrease this? I know we're at this stage in Ireland where we could potentially sort of piggyback off some of the things that they're doing in England, but what could fans do to sort of combat against this?
I was actually kind of going to raise something like that. I think Matthew said something earlier on that kind of got me thinking, with regards to just like having the match at 8 o'clock and that the pubs are open from 12. You know, and it just kind of gets you thinking of this kind of machoism around sport, and this machoism then, you know, this aggressiveness, this kind of again, racism is about power dynamics. So this is, you know, ready to call out weaknesses and be violent, because there's a violent kind of nature around it, and the kind of machoism, which kind of reminds you of, absolutely don't want to say his name, but I'm going to have to say his name because Shane brought up the idea of, you know, the youth kind of following the footsteps and seeing England and the fans and thinking it's a kind of coolness or a machoism around that. But it's kind of like the MMA kind of Conor McGregor-esque kind of thing, where you can just throw absolute any insult, say whatever you like. I think recently he even was at a match where he twisted his leg, broke his leg or something, and he had a go at, you know, insulting the other player's wife and things like that. And it just, you know, so this kind of aggressiveness, and it's being applauded and it's being encouraged, and there's money behind it as well. And we do need to address that and have a conversation about that, because why is there that kind of machoism? Why is it acceptable, and why is it encouraged? Why is advertising, you know, everything Heineken and, you know, different, you know, beers and alcohol? And, you know, I understand it's entertainment, I understand it's enjoyment, but there's a lot more to sports than getting absolutely wasted and aggressive and violent. Do you know what I mean? And you can enjoy sports without getting wasted and violent, you know, that way. So there is that kind of, there is that question around it. So you were kind of addressing what I was going to say there, and I would be interested to hear from, even just from, you know, our kind of male speakers, in terms of, like, if Matthew can address it after me, like, why is this machoism and this kind of sense of superiority and aggressiveness encouraged, and why is it, you know, why is there money being thrown at it as well?
Mm-hmm. Matt, do you want to answer that?
I'm not too sure. I can't really understand it myself. So I wouldn't necessarily call myself a macho man either. So maybe I'm not the right person to be answering that question. But I don't know. I was kind of thinking to myself, like, has this kind of behaviour happened before? Especially the scenes that happened on Sunday, like 100,000 people in Leicester Square and around that area, the damage that they did to certain businesses and stuff like that. I was trying to make up excuses for them. Was it because they've been locked up for the last 16 months and they finally getting a bit of freedom, and England are in a major final? None of that gives you a valid excuse to go and do what they were doing. And there was stories of women walking down the road with their kids who were going to the game, and they were like, men were shouting at them, "Get your tits out," and stuff like that. Like, you wouldn't do that in your own home. You wouldn't do that in your workplace. You wouldn't do that in school. You wouldn't do that where there's somebody above you to tell you not to do it. So why are you doing it in the middle of the street in front of thousands of people? And I understand what you're saying. There's a machoism and stuff like that, but you'd like to think that if some of those people were caught on camera doing those things, they'd be very ashamed of themselves the next day. And that in itself, there, if they see themselves doing something like that on camera and the next day they're laughing about it, that tells you a lot about what type of person they are. And that in itself is an issue. And I know for a fact that if I was ever doing anything like that, and I was caught on camera doing it, I'd be absolutely mortified, and I'd be ashamed of myself. And yeah, so it's I don't to be honest with you, and I'm not saying that it doesn't happen in Ireland, but I don't think the Irish people have that kind of view. Like, if Ireland ever got to a World Cup final or a European final, yeah, we probably wreck the place, but we probably stick around afterwards to clean it up. I think that's the type of nation that we are, and I'm not saying that we're God's children or anything like that, or I'm not saying that we're anything like that.
State of the Grand Canal, Doc. I don't know if we would come back and clean it up.
I think it's only if there's a match on before. I think that would be the only thing. But I think it's without delving too much into it, I think everybody's had a tough time over the last 18 months and stuff like that. And I think the English let themselves down big time on Sunday there. And I was gonna say that I hope it doesn't happen again, but there's no point in saying that, because it definitely will happen again. And they're looking to host the World Cup, I think, in 8 years' time. And if they get that World Cup in 8 years' time, there's not enough police in the country of England sort that out.
Thanks a million there, Matt. And it's really telling how much like people let themselves go. I don't even want to say let themselves go, but kind of like show their true colors in this sort of arena. And it's kind of scary a bit, but yeah, it's the world that we live in. But finally, Freaker, do you want to have the last word? And before we get going, yeah.
Well, it's just to address, listen, we can talk about this having 8 o'clock kickoff and all this kind of stuff. But we've got to remember, this is not a new thing for England fans. This is what they do when they get together. I've always said this for years. I said, listen, I don't hate all English people, but I do hate England. No, but I've evolved my thinking. I've stopped saying that now, right? But as a nation, when they get together, they're the biggest share of bastards fucking going. And that's a real sad thing, but it's reality. Euro 96, they hosted Euro 96 and they wrecked the place. This is their own country, by the way. They wrecked their own country. France 98, they wrecked France. The last Euros in Poland or whatever the hell it was, right? They were there was like we Romanian and Bulgarian beggars on the street, whatever. They were going over and racially abusing them, making them. I can't remember what they were doing, but they're humiliating this here young fella anyway. And this is what they see when they all get together, as you said, Mamobo. They show their true colours when they get, because when they get together, they can get away with it. But now people are really challenging them on it, and thankfully, England fans are now starting to challenge the other ones on it. Now, is it going to be enough for the next World Cup? I don't fucking think so. And even if they could fix it, I don't think they even deserve to get it, because this is decades of them. The 70s, the 80s, England fans were barred from Europe and all. I mean, they were wrecking every country they went to. I'm a Glasgow Celtic fan. And in Glasgow, I'm sure you know there's rivalry between Glasgow Rangers and Glasgow Celtic. There's the boys always talk about whenever Celtic got to the UEFA Cup final in Seville in 2003, they got the UEFA gave them the best fans in the world award, right? When Rangers got to the final in Manchester, the country that's supposedly so loyal to in England, they wrecked the place. It's just it's all the time. It's just what they do, and it's because there is that culture, that British culture is so deeply ingrained in them. And as I say to English people, listen, the best thing you can do if you want to change that culture, you just got to get over this. See this here UK bullshit, this British bullshit. Get over it, move on from it, leave it as a remnant of the past. You know, whatever happened. Whatever good aspects that you love and whatever else, he's beat the Nazis and all the rest, or he's had to fight the Nazis. Fair enough. There's certain aspects he's proud of, but listen, there's a whole lot of ass shit with it that you're all tied to, and it's affecting your own culture. Unfortunately, just move on from it. Let's break up the UK. Let's give Ireland back to the Irish. And yeah, I'll finish on that there note, then that'll do.
Thanks a million there, Freaker. I think we're all laughing now with your final statement. But thanks, guys, for having this conversation. It's been really telling on the aftermath of the Euros. What are the thoughts of people, particularly the fans of the England team, what their actual true, minority of those fans, that their true colours are when it comes to players of migrant background, when it comes to people playing for England. So it's been really nice having this conversation, and thank you so much for you guys watching and everyone that has spoken in this panel today. So thank you.